morning, everybody. Thanks for joining this session where we will have a deeper look at some insights of this year's European Communication Monitor about the topic of big data in communications, and we have an exciting case study about big and small data. And we will have some time also to join the discussion for your questions. So I would like to introduce the panel, and you just saw the names a minute ago. So there are two colleagues from the University of Leeds in the UK, Tench, who's sitting in the middle here, and the colleague from the University of Ljubljana, Dejan Vercic. And both of them are part of the team who conducted the survey, where we have a short look in a few minutes. And then I'm very happy to introduce Christof Ehrhart. He's the global head of communication for Deutsche Post DHL, a global company in the logistics field with nearly 500,000 employees in more than 220 countries. And we can imagine that a lot of data is in their area, in the company and around, and we'll have a look at how they deal with the data. But let's start with a short look at what is big data, because that's a buzzword nowadays, and what does it mean for us as communicators. So there's a saying that data is the oil of the information economy. You might have heard that, and as communication professionals, we're all interested to use this data. And I think the most interesting point is that it's not just to follow information and look what has been reported about our companies, but look for, let's say, the insights, whether we can use some of the information around here to shape the business strategies, to shape communication strategies. And if that is only, let's say, a very general motivation to look at the topic of big data, I think it's very important to see that it also affects our jobs, the role of communication officers, of communication departments. And this is a very nice citation here. Automation did really change the job profile of manufacturing workers, and probably how to use big data, how to analyze it, this will probably reshape the job and also employment situation of knowledge workers like communication professionals. So probably this is a very interesting topic for each of us to understand what it's all about, how we can use the opportunities. And just to introduce and give you a bit of a background, when we are talking about big data, we're talking about a lot of data information streams which are both internally from very different sources of your intranet, of employee communication, but also externally, and not only limited to public relations, to marketing, to your stakeholder engagement activities, but probably also to what is on the media and what you can probably gather from direct contacts to your constituencies. And the big question is how to get along, how to use these data in a productive way. And last but not least, and I think that's something which we could keep in mind when we have a look at the presentations right now, and we can discuss about that later, it's not a technical issue, just about access to data, about how to use it. It's also the question how we can use the data, and that means we need some basic knowledge in not only statistics and how to extract the insights, but more importantly, how to interpret the whole thing. And that means that subject matter, subject expertise matters. So you have to have knowledge of your industry, you have to understand how public opinion building works if you're talking about big data in communications. And I think that's exactly our opportunity to bring all that together to create insights. So this is just a short background of what the whole topic is about. And we will start with some insights about some key results from this year's European Communication Monitor. And I would just ask Ralph Tench and Dejan Vercic to introduce these topics.
Okay, thank you, Ansgar. And I mean, essentially, we've already heard this morning that there's great change in the communications industry. And for many years, we've regarded communications as a people industry. And we've traditionally come from the creative industries, many of us from social sciences or the arts or the humanities, moving into communication, and particularly from journalistic backgrounds as well. And so the core competency for communicators was the written word quite often. And we're seeing that that is essentially changing. And it's rather grand in academic terms to talk about paradigmatic shifts, but perhaps we are observing one here. And the communication monitor, as has been displayed this morning, has picked up on those trends over the past 10 years. Some of them that we've been looking at, interestingly, are the focus on issues of strategy, as well as the aligning of communication outputs of organizations with business goals. And of course, coming alongside that is the increasing sophistication of measurement and evaluation tools. We're also adding into that the changing landscape of media, the social media difference that was coming through with the volume and complexity of not only stakeholders, contacts, and the mechanisms for interacting with them. So this is a seismic shift in some ways around what we talk about, the competency frameworks that we need to be communicators. And today we require communicators, therefore, who can manage and deal with the changing computer-mediated world, but also can manage and interpret large volumes of data. So when we talk then about competency, we're talking also around the need for increased numerical competency in the communicator to be able to interpret and understand and leverage the information they have. So this year, in every year, we have different areas of focus, as came up in the earlier discussions. This year, we've focused the European Communication Monitor on big data and automation. Just to give a very quick background, many of you were here for the introduction this morning, will know something about the monitor. I'll just say a few words very quickly about it and how we operate. And thank you again to those of you who do respond each year. We run the survey in March of each year for a month, and we attract between 42 to 46 countries as representation. And this year, we had over 2,700 respondents. All of those respondents are bona fide practitioners in communication, so we strip out and clean our data very well. We're supported by Prime and, of course, the EACD, and this is the, I'm pleased to say, the 10th year of the survey, along with the 10th anniversary for the EACD. And we are the longest standing and the largest longitudinal study of communications practice in the world. Alongside the European Communication Monitor, members of the team are also involved in a Latin American version, as well as an Asia-Pacific version. And we've produced more than 108 articles and 40 presentations at conference. So highly disseminated and highly valued by practitioners and also in our academic community. Just to give a very quick plug as well, we have the booklet, which was going to be outside, but please do find a copy around in the presentation area outside where the stands are. They're free for everybody. We're also producing a summary of the work of the last 10 years in a practitioner book published by Palgrave Macmillan later in the year and supported by the ACD, focusing on the excellence of the communication department and the individuals. So we'll talk more about that as well. But for now, let's concentrate on the issues and trends that we found from our respondents. And firstly, we were interested in the prevalence and the importance of big data. And we wanted to know who was aware of this, who was using it and how, what were they doing with it, and did they understand what they were dealing with. And a clear majority recognized the importance of big data and can see how it's going to change practice. So 72% here, you can see, believe it will substantially change the profession. And looking to the future, practitioners also predict that big data is one of the 3 most important issues going forward. We ask future questions, and up to 2018, with nearly a quarter agreeing on its future importance. But this does seem to be a relatively recent realization for the majority of practitioners when we look that they can see there's an issue coming, they're aware of it, but are they prepared for it? So we discussed and were interested in understanding the numbers of practitioners who were following or actively engaging in discussions about big data and the sources of information that they were looking for in terms of keeping themselves informed. And as Ansgar has said, big data comes along as another of our buzzwords in the industry, and all practitioners know that it's the heart of their organization's digital activity. But it's surprising that we found that only 59% have given close attention to the debate, meaning that over a third have not given it any attention or have certainly not begun to prioritize it. So the respondents know it's important. More than half of them are following the debate. But when we ask them to answer the questions on how they understand or define big data, this was quite interesting to us. And the majority struggled to give a consistent definition. Only a minority, as you can see here, could confidently describe what it is. From the data, less than 1% got that right, or in the definitions that we had, and nearly 50% or get half or less of the statements right. So it appears to us that communicators are aware of the challenge, but have not yet learnt adequately how to deal with it, and also how to develop the development that's required to deal with it. So it's important, and it will change what we do, but we don't really understand it, and it's potentially a dangerous place to be. To respond, to support our respondents, we actually gave them in the survey some clearer definitions based on current thinking, current literature, and a model which we can see here of what it means. And in this structure, based around the 4 V's of big data, we talk about in the top left-hand corner there, volume, or arguably the scale of the data. The variety is its different forms on the top right. Velocity, on the bottom left, is the speed and the constant flow of data and the processing of that. And then, interestingly, veracity, the uncertainty or unreliability of the data. So next, I'm going to hand over to Dejan, who's going to talk about how our respondents were engaging with big data and how they themselves are classified.
So what next we try to figure out is actually how we can cluster population we were analyzing, and as you can see here, we got clear 4 clusters where majority of people in the top right cluster, we called informed, are monitoring what is going on with big data. They are trying to get acquainted with the whole process, but they are not really majority of them are not really big into it, as you will see later. Then we have quite a big group of bystanders, as we call them, who are just monitoring and not doing anything about it. They are just trying to figure out where the wind is blowing, and this is probably a very big problem that we have in our profession. Then we have 2 other groups we call pretenders and clueless, meaning that we have practically more than half of people who are not engaged with the problem of the big data and which are going to be faced with problems probably very soon. When we went deeper into the data, we also figured out that nearly half of communicators in Europe are not doing anything with the big data. Only 1 in 5 have started to implement programs which are using big data in their everyday activities. There are 16% of them who do have plans. At least they say that they have plans to implement big data in their everyday work. But it's a huge chunk of people who are not doing anything, and that's very dangerous. Also, when we talk with those who are doing something, asking them how they are using big data, it's obvious that big data are really used on the surface, more or less just for the planning purposes, just to trying to figure out, okay, we have all these data, let's figure out how we can use them, and it's mainly used as a kind of weather forecast or as a kind of mapping of the reality, so for the planning purposes. But the real use of big data is that they are allowing us to be used also for automation and for everyday operational activities, and also for the production even of the messaging, which only few people are using. So we are seeing this very shallow use of the data. And this, again, there is a huge problem related to that. Now, if we look at what people believe would be making sense of doing, so what's important and what they are actually doing, we see huge disparity. There is a huge gap between understanding, at least cognitively, what needs to be done and what we are all actually doing. And this huge disparity, this huge gap that exists, is in a certain way endangering mid-term the position we have in our organizations. And if we want to preserve or upgrade the power we have in our organizations, this is definitely one of the items on which we will have to work very hard to protect our position. If you look at the lines, you can see adaptation of algorithms to online services like search engine or social media platforms. There is more than 100% of difference between the perceived importance and what we are doing. And we are actually here even good compared to some other needs that we see. Then if you compare algorithmic tools programmed to support decision-making, huge difference. And we are talking about things which at the core management are from 1960s, 1970s. So we are lagging behind on a wave which has been now enabled by new technologies. But in reality, in management thinking, this is not something new, and we have a serious problem there. Now, why do we have these problems? And actually, what are the major challenges communicators face in Europe today in facing big data and automation? First of all, lack of analytical skills to make sense of big data. You know, it's generally known that majority of people who go into communication are people who like people. They're soft. You know, people who like numbers usually don't go studying communication or public relations or that kind of stuff. So we have a kind of cultural misfit today. We have to figure out what to do. Then lack of time and study to analyze big data, which is a kind of paradox, because studying big data, the use of big data and automation is something that should save our time, not be something that comes as a burden. Then lack of technical skills, data quality, and so on, and so on. So what are the key insights? First of all, there is on one side strong awareness. Everybody agrees it. Everybody knows by today that there is this huge thing going on around us, big data, there is automation coming, we should do something about it. But the problem is that we are simply lacking knowledge. And the question is, what are we going to do about that? Because unless we get on that train, we will simply be left behind. So this is a huge, huge problem. Then, as I mentioned, low rate and quite traditional ways of utilizing the data. We are more concerned about the weather forecast, so to say, with those data than by using them to automate our everyday activities. And of course, there are huge opportunities, particularly in communication. In journalism, they are already talking about artificial intelligence producing news and content, while we are far, far, far away from there yet in majority of organizations. And of course, we have to figure out how to upgrade skills and knowledge, and we have to figure out how to bring all that into the practice. And here, the practical case study can help us understand what the good companies are doing. Please. Okay.
Like the music almost makes us dancing. At least I hope it makes you not falling asleep in that dark room here. Well, I think Mr. Tench, Mr. Vercic, also Ansgar Zerfass indicated that we're living in times of change, no doubt about that. There's a pretty impressive book by an Italian philosopher called Luciano Floridi, who says actually only 4 people have dramatically changed the course of events in world history since the beginning, and that's Copernicus, Darwin, Freud, and Turing, sorry. And Turing, as you know, is the founding father of modern computer science. And in a way, I think he's also guiding the light for how our discipline will change, but in a different way than you might think. And I come to that at the end of my presentation. So welcome to a new world, which I guess for communicators to a large extent is an old world, because interpretation of data always has been part of what we do, because we are confronted with reality internally and externally, and we have to make sense of it, come to grips with it. But big data definitely brings a new dimension to what we do. Is it changing the whole picture? Let me start with my basic assumption right from the start. I think it provides opportunities for our discipline, but it will not be sufficient to meet the challenges for communications in the 21st century. It's actually a mix of what big data is all about, and I'm going to show you what we do in that field, with what I would call small data that makes communications in the 21st century successful. Big data standing for specifically generating significant results in the impact the company has, on the perception it generates, on the reputation it generates. Small data stands for the relevance of what a company creates in terms of external input, output, in terms of the interaction it generates with critical stakeholders, in terms of the bonding it generates with the societal environment. We are a big company, Ansgar indicated it, roughly 500,000 people in more than 220 countries. We are a mix of B2B and B2C, so ranging from complex logistics solutions down to being the German postal provider. We are offering our services, and we love data. Nothing happens in our company, including single people presentations like mine, without generating data on it, asking people for feedback, digesting the feedback, recalibrating it, trying to get better. So we also reflect that in our work as communications department, and I show you here 4 key fields in which we generate constantly by our own or with the help of external providers, a lot of data. Traditional and social media monitoring for sure, without which we would be blind. Reputation surveys, which we do because reputation is still a key part of our return on invest that we generate, and we measure year by year our reputation profile as a company. The brand image, because Deutsche Post, DHL Group as the corporate brand, as well as our product brands DHL and Deutsche Post, have billions of dollars of value, and we want to know how they develop. And so we measure constantly our brand image. But today I want to focus on our issues monitoring, which is a real-time monitoring exercise that we do in order to know which public debates are dealt with around our company and which public debates we impact, willingly or unwillingly, as a business. We monitor basically 9 global trends and topics, as well as 25 specific issues related to what we call responsible business practice. We try to match the overall societal environment as far as it is relevant to our business and as far as we as a business impact it, as I said. And we put on top specific questions of corporate responsibility. The topics in themselves shouldn't surprise you a lot. They reflect major trends and major change which is going on right now. To some extent, they also reflect the nature of our business, but I would guess specifically those in the yellow frame are not so far away from topics that any other company, not being in logistics, would also look into. We have established, with the help of Prime Research, an issues monitoring center, which is also available online, and I will show you a little bit of it in a few minutes, which constantly measures and analyzes issues as they are put forward, discussed, and are surfacing in the digital world. So over 25K of online news sources and blogs are constantly revisited. We check about 100 relevant Twitter channels. We cover 35 different markets, and thus generating about 45K of analysis results per day. That's what I would call big data. The analysis is done in an automated way, so there's a dynamic dashboard which visualizes the big data in a way that we can digest the results fast and also can give people who are not experts in issues analysis or experts in communications, a quick overview by just giving them access to the dashboard. We analyze major trends as far as topics are concerned that are discussed in the digital sphere. We look into the share of voice that certain topics have, and we try to reflect the respective tonality. We use tools such as the word cloud in order to give a quick view into what is important or what is hot at the moment and what is less important, and then the typical bar charts in order to show which sources are relevant or which countries play a major role. And this is maybe the moment where I would ask the director which supports me here to switch on a second frame which shows you the issue center, which is not publicly available. We are logged in via our internal password and user group here, and I would ask the director just to click on the environment and sustainability field, which opens up then the specific analysis on environment and sustainability, and we would look here for the specifics of the Twitter analysis, which can be picked right here, exactly. So we move away from news and blogs only to Twitter only. What you see on the upper chart of that center here is typical numbers such as unique users, the postage volume, the shares that are generated, and resonance, and so on, and that always in difference to earlier time frames, which you can pick a day before, 2 days before, a few weeks before. What the colleague does right now is he moves over the time horizon and shows how the importance of topics has developed over time. So the hierarchy of issues and how they play a role for us is changing, and we can make that very easy to be understood. And if we scroll a bit down, you see there again the issues cloud, the word cloud I was talking about, which gives you a quick overview on what's hot at the moment, as well as a live feed on Twitter posts which have been put out. And you can see specifically what people actually are talking about in their Twitter feeds. And we have that share of voice logic down there with the pie chart, and as well specific media that are referenced to here. So that just as a little flavor of what we do, and I would just go on with the physical presentation. So I can jump over that because I've shown you real time. As I indicated in the beginning, I would raise signs of cautiousness to say big data is the new El Dorado and it will change everything forever in communications alone. And in order to convince you about that, I show you this rather complicated slide. But for us, also in my team, it's important to reflect on where we are at the moment. We very much believe that for successful communications in the future, it is about two things you have to achieve. Yes, you have to impact the perception of the company in the public, and you do that by, at the end of the day, generating reputation. And in order to generate reputation, you use the classical methods of mass communication. You run big campaigns, you try to reach a lot of people, you measure your results in readers, in eyeballs, in clicks, and it's always big numbers with lots of zero positions attached to them. And the specific mode in which we do it is talking. Exactly what I do right now and what we communicators do most of the time. Sending information to someone. And that reflects very much the big data world and the way we use the big data results at the moment. But there's a different part of the equation, which is the small data equation, and that is not so much about generating perceptions impact, it's about generating engagement impact. And engagement impact does not generate reputation itself, it generates what we call bonding. A social relationship, maybe that's reflecting the fact that PR people like other people, and I've heard that this is one of the reasons why they go into the job. So maybe that's the emotional dimension of what we do. We try to be in touch with people in order to create a sustainable relationship. And in order to do so, we are not using the classical methods of mass communication. We use methods of small numbers, conversations, one-on-one meetings, formats that create maybe nudge-on effects where one person talks to the other person and slowly a message is spread. And the key mode here is not talking, it's listening. And if you bring reputation and bonding together, big data and small data together, something new is created, which I call stakeholder capital. And as a matter of fact, in our view at least, it's the combination of those two elements that makes communication successful in the future. And here are a few examples. We had quite a hassle with one of our products, which is an advertising magazine which is wrapped in plastic foil. A plastic foil, by the way, which is biodegradable, which you can put just into the normal paper box. It is separated from the paper, can be easily dealt with in terms of environmental impact, everything fine. But what happened is there was a young guy who started an online petition against plastic wrapping of advertising magazines, and he did not go against Mickey Mouse, which also does plastic wrapping, or any female magazine. He went against us because of the size of our brand, our company in Germany. And it started slowly to build a reputational issue also with the print media because it jumped over into print media coverage regionally. And the only way to deal with it was to talk to that guy and 2 or 3 people around him. This was not a media relations job at all. Surely we spoke to journalists. Surely we tried to explain people that a product basically is fine and how we work with it. At the end of the day, it was about a Fortune 500 company dealing with a 17-year-old pupil in Lower Bavaria. And the fact that this is, I would say, under control, it's not over yet because we're still discussing, is that we have not bet so much on the big data, we bet on the small data. Dialogue with stakeholders on material issues. We've been the first company to have a carbon efficiency goal in our industry, and we very much focused on CO2 emissions. And we just learned by stakeholder dialogues that there's a different topic that we never really had so much on the agenda, and that was air pollution and noise, specifically the noise part, if it comes to aviation. And we reacted upon that finding, which is the result of our respective stakeholder engagement and stakeholder dialogue, and started to create a total new program related to that question, which would not exist without identifying those topics in direct interaction with our stakeholders. Not the media brought it up, not any brand-related topic brought it up, it was the stakeholder engagement that put it on the agenda. To put it on a more strategic perspective, this circle here shows you the basic strategic approach to communications in our company. And what I did is I just highlighted in the strategic process where rather big data plays a major role and where rather small data plays a major role. It starts with, you will not be surprised, basic analysis on how we are doing in terms of our media presence, in terms of our stakeholder profile and so on. And that, to a large extent, is big data driven. You collect intelligence. But already in a second step, where you do prioritization and you assess the importance of topics, it is about small data, because the rationale to find out what is important for us and what isn't is the result of small group interactions with experts inside and outside the company. Then we define opportunities for our agenda setting and dialogue based on business units analysis. We ask business what they think, and if you want so, I took the liberty to say that the way they interact with their markets, the way they find out what their customers think, is a big data exercise, basically. Because what feedback you generate from a customer, the way customers react upon your pricing or your product quality, is the result of a lot of information being put together and then being reflected in revenue or in price or in business success, which is big data. Step 4, when we report on analysis results to create transparency for our decision making, it's a combination of both, of big data analysis and small data analysis. It brings the usual tools that you use in order to find out where you are in terms of your communications impact, together with piecemeal evidence that you collect aside. And then the final step, when you try to gain relevant information and understanding expectations through dialogue, that specifically is a dialogue exercise, and it happens specifically if you have a problem which you cannot solve by just running a major campaign or doing a major media relations outreach. So, what are the learnings? I think big data is an opportunity for gaining insights on reputation and creating situational awareness, a very powerful monitoring tool. But in order to allow meaningful interpretation, to be even more precise here, it has to be combined with small data. And I think our discipline, not only today, not only in the last 5 or 10 years, is not short on large amounts of data, it's short on meaningful interpretation of data. By leveraging both big and small data, corporate communications can transcend agenda setting and begin to really understand stakeholder expectations and do rather what I would call a stakeholder alignment process. And in the new era of strategic comms management, it is not about driving reputation alone and maybe in order to do so using big data applications, it's about driving reputation and stakeholder bonding in order to gain stakeholder capital. And for that, again, you need both logics, the small data and the big data logic. And I'm 20 seconds shorter than I was allowed to be. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks to all presenters. So I would just like to open the discussion with 1 or 2 questions, and then you're invited also to share your insights and ask questions. So probably to start with, I think it was obviously Deutsche Post DHL has a very not only analytical but also strategic approach to corporate communications. And you made the point that it has to be a combination of big data but also more qualitative personal insights. What was not mentioned in your presentation was a topic which was mentioned before based on journalism, where we have really now a tendency to also automatically create content. Is this something which you do nowadays, which you see applications in Corpcom, internal, externally, or does it really not make sense really to use these insights or probably adapt content for different stakeholders? Because I think you will probably have a huge, massive content in your portfolio.
Well, it's a fair question, and I would think that in the future there will also be applications that allow to use existing content in a multifold way, adapted automatically, semi-automatically to different channels. But it's only a means to an end, an instrument at the end of a process, which is steered by a logic that has to be provided on a small databases by an informed communicator. And your question also allows me to close the Turing story which I told, because the reason why most of us know about Mr. Turing is the famous Turing Test, which is a test by which in a predefined test situation you find out if the individual you communicate with is a machine or an individual. So far, at least most of the people you ask say no machine yet has passed the Turing test. Some people say it will happen pretty soon. It's also related to the discussion about the singularity that is going on at the moment, which relates to artificial intelligence. Other people say it will never happen. I turned the Turing test's logic around, and to say, finally answer your question, Ansgar, I would say we have to make sure that we as communicator pass the reverse Turing test and are able to show to the public also in the future that we are individuals, human beings, and not machines. And there will be a point in time when it will be a sign of quality that a person that is interacting with a company on a marketing or on a PR basis is realizing I'm really confronted with content which has been written by an individual, or I'm writing to an individual rather than to a bot that is just placed somewhere to give me a certain piece of information. So a tool maybe, in some fields, I doubt if that will be a key success factor in communications long term.
I think you made an interesting point, which is also mentioned in the report, because the debate about automated communication has been criticized also by researchers, because if you think along, as you said, probably we end up in an area where, let's say, there's automated communications from NGOs and from corporations or from whatever political parties, but it does not make sense for nobody, not for society, not for us. And probably we have to keep that in mind, but on the other hand, there's something in between, which we are exploring at the moment. So probably just to talk about, keep a minute, the same issue. From your perspective, from research, because there is research in journalism, obviously, sports journalism, for example. Do you see that there are opportunities in this middle range field where we can use these algorithms to really support daily work, to make it easier to adapt content for different stakeholders if we have, on the one hand, profiles of stakeholders, their needs, and on the other hand, we have classified interesting content, probably. Is this something which will come up in the near future? What do you think?
Absolutely. I think that we have a problem with communication that traditionally Corp Comm has been based in social science, and that's how we all operate. We are a literate type of academics and practitioners, while reality out there is actually split in three sectors, I would say. We have this traditional literate scientific side, but there is now appearing artificial intelligence side, so we have a problem that we are not trained enough in computer sciences to understand what options there are available, and it's definitely coming from the other side as journalism is now exploiting this. The third, I think that there is going to open another line of open question, which is going to be the artistic line, in a sense that the type of argumentation we use in our literate world, those of us who are trained on books and magazines, is not the same as the majority population is now using. If you look at the Brexit, if you look at the American elections, people go for images, people go for very short sound bites, more and more, and you don't even have to defend your non-logical argumentation anymore. And from that perspective, it was very interesting to see this submission for Young Communicator Award by ThyssenKrupp. You know, that corporations these days have to visualize themselves because they have to catch up with where people are at the moment. So we will see as a kind of triangular movement of the profession. I see a big opportunity for artificial intelligence and automation in our work, and we are not even there yet at understanding of what opportunities lay ahead of us. Just one very obvious example, which is going to be here very soon, and that is artificial translations. You know, as you become a global company, question of languages become more and more complicated. Even if you are at the top edge, as Deutsche Post and DHL is here presented, at the moment you operate only on several languages with all this catching up. Now, if we can have good operational language translation to all existing languages, for example, and if we can good machine translation of spoken language, visual language, and literal language, think about the opportunities that lay there. It's tremendous.
Obviously, it's always, we always talk in research about the gaps just to focus on that, but we don't have to miss, obviously, what is existing, what is working. So second topic probably we can just talk a minute about that is about the competencies needed, because obviously combining these issues of big data, small data, and we talked about these different fields, means we need different skills. So what are your experiences in your company? Because I believe there are obviously different people, different service providers in this whole model and process. Is it easy to balance the whole thing? Do you need different competencies now and in the future because of this combination of different data you have to handle?
No, it's not easy, and I would actually echo what Mr. Vercic also said. We are surely very much driven by the social science paradigm, which to some extent is also good news, because there was an earlier paradigm of comms which was far away from all kinds of let's say science-based activities, specifically in Europe. But now we are totally immersed in that, and in order to move into the world I described, we have to learn new tricks. And we are just in the period in my team, actually, we call that a future-proofing process. I'm sure you are familiar with the future-proofing concept, which relates to a digitization way of thinking, which is everything that can be put in a flowchart will be done by artificial intelligence, will no longer be done by human beings. And I said to my team, let's do a mental experiment and find out if we as a function have a future in 10 years. I want to have a future-proofing corporate communications and responsibility at Deutsche Post DHL Group project. And we're working on that at the moment. And what we try to do is, I simplify it, we try to organize a learning exercise between the generations. I'm a Generation X guy, and most of my people in the team are, but we have more and more Generation Y folks coming in who are digital natives. They are far advanced in the usage of social media, but also in the way to understand data streams and how they potentially can be linked together. So they have the big data know-how, to use the words here. The problem arises if with all of the data they have and all of the connections they see, you ask them to turn that into a concrete action now. Because as we all know, communications is surely about great analysis, but at the end of the day, someone will say, okay, what do we do now? Do we call the guy? Don't we call the guy? What do we tell the person? Do we run the campaign? Blah, blah, blah. So in the small data field, interpretation, they lack experience and understanding, and we try to organize that. Or to mention another example, with those young people comes totally different ways of working. The classical situation where you take a problem with you in your room and you sit down and rack your brain in order to find out what should you think, maybe do some desk research and then come up with a solution. It's not the way they work. In order to organize the teamwork they usually do is they very fast try to get as much information at their fingertips as they can and then come up with meaningful conclusions they draw. We try to, and there are words for that, agile, scrum, design thinking, ways of working. We try to answer the question, what does that mean for communications work? But that's an open process, or kind of a laboratory that we're working in at the moment. And to be honest, I think nobody really has yet found the right answer. There are some comms teams I know who work into that direction, which interestingly enough, for people who look from the outside, looks very much like the old agency model. And if you ask agency people to look into a more agile-oriented way of corporate communications work, they say, oops, that's the way we work since 20 years and we didn't like it at all. That's why the agency people all want to go into corporate and be in their organizational box and have a quieter life. I think that's definitely a field in which we all are still experimenting and try to find out what is the right solution moving forward. In maybe final sentence, if you want to have a very clear-cut example on what we lack at the moment is a tool that shows you the different data streams real time, and not only from an issues department perspective, but also from a media relations, a reputation management, a brand a profile perspective, and plays in small data results, so that you have everything in one cockpit. Every morning when you do your morning briefing, as I do it, and many of you will do it as well, that's something that doesn't exist yet.
Probably just a short answer, Ralph. You're an expert also in competencies development. You work in this field since many years, and we also had some other questions in the European Communication Monitor about that. We also see a shift and a lag there. So do you have any ideas also related to other fields how we can close that gap? Because it's obviously a dynamic field. We can not only, everybody has to learn now IT and how to interpret algorithms. So where's the middle way to find profiles which are sustainable in the future for communicators?
Well, I think there's a responsibility on all of us, actually. We who come from educational backgrounds in terms of our institutions, we have to reflect and think on what we are developing in the new recruits going into organizations. But I do believe it's one of the things that we regularly pick up on in the European Communication Monitor is probably the inconsistent development of our own people. And do we invest enough in training and developing people? Are we prepared to put the money into the long-term investment of our staff and our employees? We therefore need to have, I suspect, a refreshment of what are those competency needs. I mentioned in my introduction, we talk about frameworks, competency frameworks. We have some competency frameworks for communication. I think already they're beginning to look out of date, and we need to refresh that. And I think that drives both sort of pedagogic curriculum from a university perspective, but more importantly, we need hands-on, on-the-job training and development. Many young people are now moving into the communications roles through more apprenticeship-style developments. Many corporates, many people in this room will have their own internal university-style, they'll call them university-style structures. So it's about, I think, tapping into and sharing and understanding what are the needs and the requirements, and then how we actually work together to develop those through associations, national institutes, but more importantly through the large corporates themselves as well.
Okay, thank you. So we have some minutes left for your questions. We just touched some points, but I think probably there are more questions to the presenters about the whole topic of big data, small data, how to combine it. I think we should have a mic somewhere. Yeah, there's a mic. Just go ahead. Any questions, any experiences to share? Or probably the topic is so new and
Maybe
complicated.
while people are on it,
Yeah,
yes.
here, thank you.
Good morning. I have a question for you. There are some other expertise fields where the aspects of what you call small data are already researched so much that they are not anymore, let's say, depending on experience and at the moment skills to decide, but they are in the field of big data already. Biological experiments, brain research. So I can imagine that there must be a difference between you as a practitioner calling for small data, and on the other hand, maybe one of the research colleagues here that says you're making the small data field too big. It's already taken into account of the big data. Am I making myself clear?
Yes, absolutely. And I think we're pretty close to each other. What I think is important is that in order to make use of big data in a relevant way, you have to find the right interpretation logic. And the algorithm that everyone talks about is nothing else than a standard interpretation. And the standard interpretation comes not out of the big data. It comes out of small data analysis. That's at least my professional experience. And you're also right. It's other fields that teach you more on that one than the classical comms field and also than the modern big data field. In my company, the fact that we think like that is the result of the fact that communications and sustainability have been put together. And I have colleagues in my team who are not media relations experts, who are not marketeers. They are experts for environmental sustainability, stakeholder dialogue, responsible business practice. They have a different approach to communications.
Thank you.
Down there.
There's
Down
the
there.
lady.
Down here, please.
Hello, my name is Stefanie Weitz. I'm from Swiss Re. A very impressive presentation. Actually, my key question is, when did you start this journey to come to here? So how long was that journey? Because I think to arrive at that stage, it takes quite a long time. So I would like to hear that. And then also, how did you shift the mindset in your team to get to that sort of data-driven approach? Is it because you're already doing a lot of data analytics in your company that made it easier? How would you, or what would be your advice for companies that are less data-driven, and how can you make that shift if they want to? Thank you.
Thank you. It took us about 8 years to be where we are, and I know it exactly because I arrived about 8 years ago. and I took over a very well-performing classical communications department. And in the first 2 years, we established a strategic process targeted towards generating the ROI reputation, built a systematic for it, measuring, defining initiatives, evaluating results, recalibrate, doing the next circle. I established a procedure which we do every year since then. 7 years now of strategic cycles behind us. Then I was asked if I could imagine also to be in charge of corporate responsibility, which my CEO at that point in time, I quote him, said, "I think it's a shitty idea, but someone told me I should ask you." I like the idea because I have, and I hope I made that clear, the understanding that comms is more than just painting things in a certain color. You have to deal with the nature of things. So I said, this can propel us forward if we really create a learning exercise between the comms and the responsibility people. We did that. The responsibility team hated it in the beginning. The comms people hated it. Why? Because responsibility folks thought the comms people are all cynical assholes, and the communications people thought the responsibility folks are all tree huggers. So we had quite a cultural divide in the team, but over time we were able to turn that into a creative dynamic, which led to the process I described you. So what we basically did is we beefed up the traditional strategic process, which was to some extent, even if that didn't play a big role at that time yet, big data driven, but lots of information, which you are right, is related to the fact that we measure all the time anyway as a major company. So it was easy to convince people to do the same measuring thing also in communications. But we added to that big data logic, the small data logic. And the last part of the journey, which we just have started, is we have identified that reputation no longer can be the key return on invest. This is now reputation and bonding, stakeholder capital, but how to measure stakeholder capital, which is a pretty complex thing. There is no standard answers to it. I'm sure the academic experts on the panel will subscribe to that. And secondly, how to involve that in daily decision making. Because if I'm self-critical, I still every morning, 15 minutes past 8 when I do my morning briefing, I have the social media folks around, I see the data, I see the clippings, I have my strategic advisor with me, but I tend still to look into what did the Daily Tabloid write, what is the key set of messages on the intranet, while I'm sure there is also interesting data to be gained from the small exchanges that took place in the last 2 or 3 days, which also send strong signals, but it's very hard to put that into one picture. And we're working on that at the moment very hard.
Okay, thank you. So thanks everybody. I think we have a last short question, and then we will wrap up because lunch is waiting for us. Please, your question.
Yeah, thank you. So very technical question. So did you develop this big data monitoring tool by yourself, or you use some kind of provider? So how did you develop it?
We use a provider. The provider's Prime. Actually, a colleague from Prime is here sitting. You can flock to him later on and he will sell the tool to all of you. And I think we have given some good input because we had an idea of what we were looking for. You know the social science paradigm, garbage in, garbage out. If you do not know what you're looking for and you put the wrong data in, you will not get good results. But there are companies around who can help you to build such frameworks in order to generate relevant data streams.
Yeah. Thank you. So I would like to thank everybody for this only obviously short insight, but I think this is all what also the European Communication Monitor research is about. Obviously, research on that level in different countries can only give you some ideas where to go deeper, where to reflect on whether these insights across different companies or organizations, what does it mean for you, for your organization, for your business environment, and you only can do that by reflecting, by combining it with best case studies, for example, and probably you find some time to look into that and start a discussion in your teams like you did. I think that's what it's all about if we jointly want to contribute to have a more future-proof, as you told us, profession in the future. And I think everybody should join that journey, starting from education to reflecting the professional community and to do something in your own role as a communication leader. So thanks for joining the session. We will have a lunch time now outside, and then please look at your program and join the next workshop after lunch. There are plenty of opportunities over here today. Thank you again.